Hello, and welcome to Myth Matters, an exploration at the intersection of mythology, creativity, and consciousness. I'm your host, Dr. Catherine Svela. Wherever you may be in this wide, beautiful, crazy world of ours, I'm glad that you decided to join me here today. I have one of my favorite stories for you today, one that I've worked with a number of times. It's called The King and the Corpse, and it's been visiting me for several weeks, which is something I don't want to ignore. And you may see what I mean when you hear the story. The King and the Corpse is part of a collection by Henrik Zimmer, edited by Joseph Campbell, called The King and the Corpse, Tales of the Soul's Conquest of Evil. I find this story intriguing and humorous and deep, and I'll stop there as I want you to meet it freshly and have your own response. So I invite you to settle in to listen and let yourself enter the story. Note the details that call to you or the questions that arise. They are clues to your journey and the place this story occupies in your life right now. I'll share a few thoughts about my relationship to the story after I tell it. The King and the Corpse. It's really quite remarkable how the king became involved in this particular adventure. For 10 years, he appeared in his audience chamber and sat hearing the petitions of his citizens. And every day, a holy beggar appeared and offered him a piece of fruit. Every day, he offered the king this gift of fruit and then vanished back into the crowd of citizens without saying a word. The king, for his part, took the fruit and passed it to his treasurer, who was standing behind his throne, without giving the trifling gift another thought. And every day, the treasurer took the fruit and tossed it through a tiny window down into the treasury house without even bothering to unlock the door. This went on for 10 years, and it could have gone on even longer, but it so happened that one day a tame monkey escaped from the women's apartments in the palace. The monkey bounded into the stateroom about the same time that the beggar showed up with his fruit. The holy man handed the king the fruit, and the monkey jumped up onto the arm of the king's throne. The king playfully offered the monkey the piece of fruit, and when the animal bit into it, a valuable jewel dropped out and rolled across the floor. Now, the king's eyes grew wide. With great dignity, he turned to the treasurer, who was standing beside the throne, and said, "Tell me, what has happened to the rest of the fruit?" The treasurer didn't know, since he had been casually throwing the fruit through the window of the treasury, so he immediately excused himself and rushed over to the treasury house. He unlocked the door, and there beneath the tiny window was a huge pile of fruit in various states of decay and a jumble of precious jewels. The king was very pleased at this turn of events. But because he was a very generous king and not particularly interested in accumulating additional wealth, he gave the entire heap of gems to his treasurer. He wasn't really that interested in the jewels, but he was very curious now about this beggar. The next day, when the holy man once again appeared and offered him a piece of fruit, the king said, "No, I'm not going to take your gift unless you and I have a little conversation." "Well, Your Majesty," said the beggar, "it would be best if we could speak privately." The king granted his desire. The two men sat across from each other, and the king said, Tell me, what is the meaning of these gifts of fruit?" "I'm in need of help," said the holy beggar, "and I need the assistance of a hero, a truly intrepid man, to assist me in a certain enterprise of magic." "Oh," said the king. Now he was very interested. "Go on." "It is said," the holy man went on, "that the weapons of true heroes are especially powerful in the face of magic, that they have a sort of exorcising power." "Yes," said the king. "Go on." "I'm wondering," said the holy beggar, "if you would come to the great funeral grounds on the edge of the city, the place where the dead are cremated and the criminals hanged, on the night of the next new moon. Could you meet me there then?" The king was undaunted despite the rather unsavory location of this meeting. "Yes, I will meet you on the next new moon," he said. And with that, the holy beggar took his leave. Soon the appointed night arrived, the night of the new moon. The king put on his sword and wrapped himself in a dark cloak. All alone, he set out on his adventure. When he got to the burial ground, he was very aware of the odd sounds of the restless spirits and the demons that were hovering around the place, feasting on what was left of the dead. There was no light in the place except for the glowing embers of the smoldering funeral pyres, and he could see the ghouls and the demons feasting on the blackened skeletons. It was a pretty grim sight, but the king was brave and unafraid and walked on to his appointed rendezvous. At last he found the holy beggar. The man was drawing a magic circle on the ground. "Here I am," the king said. "What can I do for you?" The other man hardly lifted up his eyes. He said, "Go to the other side of the burning ground. You will find the corpse of a hanged man dangling from a large tree. Cut down the corpse and bring it here to me." The king turned around and set off back across the large funeral ground. The night was very dark, and the foul air carried the sound of the demons and the ghosts and the ghouls swirling around. But the king stayed calm. When he got to the far edge of the burning ground, he saw a large tree with a body hanging from it, just as the beggar had said. He climbed up the tree and cut the rope with his sword. The corpse fell down to the ground, but oddly enough, it gave a moan as if it had been hurt. The king was surprised. He climbed back down and went to the body and felt it, thinking that maybe there was still some life in it. As he was doing this, a shrill laugh came from the body. The king realized that it was a corpse and was quite dead, but was inhabited by a ghost. "What are you laughing at?" he demanded. The instant that he spoke, the corpse flew back up to the limb of the tree. The king looked up at the body for a moment. Then he patiently climbed back up the tree and cut it down with his sword a second time. When he picked up the corpse, he didn't say a word. He put it on his shoulder and started to walk back to the beggar magician. He hadn't gone very far when the ghost in the corpse said, "O king, why don't you let me shorten the way for you with a little tale?" The king was smart now to the ploy of the corpse, so he didn't say a word. "I'll take that as a yes, then," said the corpse, "and tell you a little story." So he began. "Once upon a time," said the corpse, "there was a certain prince who went out on a hunting party with his friend, who was the son of the chancellor of the prince's father. The two of them lost track of the rest of their companions, so it was just the two of them strolling rather aimlessly through the forest when they arrived at a very pleasant lake. They stopped on the banks to rest, and the prince saw a beautiful maiden bathing on the far side, on the other bank. Unobserved by her companions, she made signals to him across the water. The prince didn't understand what she was signaling, but the chancellor's son caught the meaning of her signs very well. This beautiful young maiden communicated to them her name, that of her family, and the name of her kingdom. She also indicated that she was in love with the prince. Then she got up to rejoin her companions and vanished into the trees. The two young men went back home, intrigued. The next day they decided to go out hunting again. As they set off through the jungle, they separated themselves from the rest of their friends and went to the town where the girl lived. There they found lodging with an old woman, whom they bribed to take a message to the young girl. Now, all of this required a certain amount of subterfuge, of course, because in this culture at this time, a young man and a young woman were not going to meet without the arrangements being at least approved, if not set up, by the parents. The old woman went as messenger, and the girl, to her credit, was so cunning that she managed to send a message back to the prince without the old woman realizing that a rendezvous was being organized. The first time they decided to get together, the visit had to be postponed because the astrological omens were not adequate. But the next night, they decided to go ahead. The prince went to the girl's house, climbed over the wall, crossed the garden, found her window, and went into her room. The two young lovers found a great deal of delight in each other's arms, and when the girl learned that it was not the prince who understood her signals, but rather his friend, she got a little bit concerned, though. Privately, she worried that this third party might betray her and reveal her affair to someone. Without saying anything to the prince, she made a plan to poison his friend. Now, the son of the chancellor was obviously a pretty clever guy, and he had foreseen this possibility. He came up with a plan to foil her and to teach her that he knew how to take care of himself and his prince. He disguised himself as a beggar monk and persuaded the prince to pretend that he was one of his pupils. Then the two young men went back to the girl's kingdom, but this time they went to the king. Now the king in that kingdom was grief-stricken because his infant son had recently died. The chancellor's son, dressed up in disguise as a beggar monk, convinced the king that this young woman was a witch and responsible for the death of his son. There was no way for the girl to fight off the accusations, and she was condemned to a terrible death. She was left naked and exposed on the outside of town, where the wild animals would eventually kill and eat her. She was wailing and crying, and her family left very upset. As soon as she was all alone, the prince and his friend rode up on swift horses and rescued her. They took her back to the prince's kingdom, where she could become his wife and future queen. Happy ending for everybody, right? Not exactly. The girl's parents were so ashamed and grief-stricken over the loss of their daughter, whom they believed to be dead, that they died of broken hearts. "That's the end of my story," the corpse said to the king. "Now tell me, who was guilty of the death of these two old people?" If you know the answer and you do not reply, my king, your head will burst into 100 pieces. The king believed that he knew the answer, but he was afraid that if he said anything, the corpse would immediately fly back to the tree. Nevertheless, he did not want his head to explode, so he answered the question. Neither the maid nor the prince was guilty, he said, because they were madly in love. And the son of the chancellor was not guilty because he was merely fulfilling his responsibility in service to his master, the prince. The only one that is guilty is the king of that girl's country, because he let these things come to pass within his realm. First of all, he did not see the subtle trick that was played on him as a result of his grief. He didn't notice that the men were in disguise. In fact, he'd never even taken cognizance of the activities of these two strangers in his very own capital. He wasn't even aware they were there. So he is guilty of failure in his kingly duty, because a king should be the all-seeing eyes of his kingdom, the all-knowing protector and governor of his people. As soon as the king uttered his last word of judgment, the corpse, moaning in mock agony, vanished from his shoulder. The king knew that it was once again hanging from the tree. He walked back to the big tree, and sure enough, there was the corpse. He climbed back up, cut the corpse down, went down, threw it over his shoulder, and started off again in silence. "My dear sir," the corpse addressed him again, "you have encumbered yourself with a very difficult and curious task. You will permit me, I imagine, to tell you another story, to pass the time we've got here together." The king said nothing. So the corpse began to tell another tale. "This time," he said, "there were 3 young Brahmins who all lived in the home of their spiritual teacher. Now, all 3 of these men were spiritual seekers, and they were all brothers, and they were all in love with their teacher's daughter. He did not give her to any one of the young men for fear of breaking the hearts of the other 2. But then the young girl became seriously ill and died. All 3 of the men, equally desperate, committed her body to the funeral pyre. When she had been cremated, the first man decided that he would deal with his grief by wandering the world as a beggar monk. The second young man decided that he would deal with his grief by gathering the bones of his beloved from the ashes and taking them to the holy Ganges River, where they could be washed, ensuring that she would have a safe journey to the next realm. The third young man decided that he would deal with his grief by staying right there, on the spot, with her. He constructed a hermit's hut over the place of the fire and stayed there and slept in the ashes of the body of his beloved. Now, the one who had decided to roam the world experienced an extraordinary event. One day, he saw a man read from a book a magic charm that brought a child back to life. He took the book and hurried back to the cremation scene. It just so happened that as he arrived with the book, the young man who had gone to the Ganges came back with the bones. And of course, the third young man was already there, in the ashes. They agreed to reassemble her bones and lay them out in the ashes. Then, using the book and the magic spell, the first one managed to bring her back to life. And she was even more beautiful than ever. "Now," said the corpse to the king, "to whom does she belong? And don't forget, if you know the answer and you do not reply, your head will explode." Of course, the king thought that he knew the answer, so he was forced to reply. The one who recalled her to life with the magic spell, he said, acted as a father to her. The one who did the pious service of taking her bones to the Ganges performed the duty of a son. But the one who slept on the ashes and would not leave her, he devoted his life to her, and he is the one who acted as her spouse. As soon as the king finished answering, the corpse disappeared and was back in the tree. Once again, the king had to walk back to the tree and cut the corpse down. The king and the corpse were once again crossing the funerary ground. "I say, king," said the corpse, "you have had an answer to every dilemma that I have posed thus far. How about another story to pass the time? This one poses a very interesting problem. It is a curious story indeed." The ghost proceeded to tell the king this tale. Once there were two young men, lifelong friends, and a girl. The girl married one of the two men, and they were not particularly happy together. Shortly after the wedding, the couple and their bachelor friend traveled together to visit the bride's parents. On the way, they came to a temple to the goddess Kali, the great mother goddess of the Hindus, who is both life and death. Kali is the goddess of blood and milk. The husband decided to stop and pray. He went into the temple alone, and there, in a sudden excess of emotion, he was moved to sacrifice himself to the goddess and cut off his own head with his own sharp sword. Meanwhile, the friend and the wife were waiting, and after a time the friend went into the temple to retrieve his friend. When he found his friend lying in a pool of blood, he was also inspired to cut off his own head. Finally, the bride comes in. Overwhelmed at the sight of these two friends lying there headless, she runs out of the temple, intending to hang herself. But the goddess Kali herself speaks to the girl and tells her to go back in and replace the two heads. This would bring the two young men back to life. The young wife does this, but she's so distracted, and honestly, who can blame her, that she puts the wrong head on each of the bodies. The friend's head is now on the husband's body, and the husband's head is now on the body of the friend. "Now," the corpse said to the king, "tell me, king, to which one is she now married? Is she married to the one with her husband's head, or the one with the husband's body?" The king thought that he knew the answer, and because he didn't want his own head exploding, he said, "The head is supreme among all members of the body. She is married to the one with her husband's head." No sooner had the king finished than, poof, the corpse vanished, and the king walked back to that fateful tree. The king and the corpse passed the better part of the night in this fashion. 23 times the king cut down the corpse, and 23 times he reluctantly and thoughtfully provided an answer to the ghost's riddle. The king heard the kind of twisted plots that mirror life, about love lost and found, of misunderstandings and betrayals, and all of the tangles that plague human existence. The threads of these stories always snarled up into knots of right and wrong, and the ghost continued asking, "Who is to blame? Who deserves this?" over and over again. The night is still dark. The graveyard demons still howl. Now the ghost in the corpse begins yet another story. "My dear king," he said, "I have another tale for you, one that you have not yet heard. In a distant land, in another time, There was once a father and son, a chieftain and son, to be exact, neighboring hunters. The father was widowed and still grieving for his dead wife. The son had never been married. One day, the two went out hunting, and they came upon two sets of footprints. Being very skilled hunters, they immediately understood that these were the footprints of two women, probably a mother and daughter of noble birth. They speculated that something had happened to the king that had forced these women to flee. They contemplated the footprints. The son said to his father, "Why don't we track these two women, find and marry them?" At first, the father didn't want to. He was still in sorrow. But eventually he was convinced, and they swore an oath that they would find the women, and the father would marry the woman with the bigger feet, who was presumably the mother, and the son would accordingly and appropriately marry the woman with the smaller feet because she was younger, the daughter. They tracked the women, and sure enough, they were a queen and a princess fleeing their kingdom because the king had died unexpectedly. Everything is fine, except there's one little hitch. The daughter, the princess, the younger woman, is the one with the bigger feet. But because they've sworn an oath, the father and the son proceed as they had planned. The four of them go back to their village. The father marries the daughter, and the son marries the mother. In due time, both of these women have sons. Now, the ghost says to the king, "How are these two related to each other?" The king thinks about this. A light went on in the mind and heart of our king. He realizes that there is no single answer. "Well," he says to the corpse, "that depends on how you look at it. Why, these two are living paradox. They are simultaneously uncle and nephew." And isn't this always the way with all things? In some secret respect, is not everything in some deep way its own opposite? The king began to ponder his own character, his certainty, and his blindness. He was invigorated by a new awareness, and this time the corpse did not fly back into the tree. The king walked along with the body over his shoulder, almost jaunty. The specter was impressed. "My king," he said, "here you have labored all night long, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I'm really impressed by your energy, and also by the fact that you are not afraid. So, I'll tell you a secret. I am about to leave this body, and when I do, you will take it back to the monk. But before I go, I need to tell you something else. The man that you are dealing with is an imposter. He is not a holy man. He's evil. He plans to cast some really nasty spells that will force me to go back into this body. And when he has accomplished this and made a zombie of me, he will hold me up as a god and ask you, my king, to kneel down and worship me. If you do this, he will then offer you up as a victim. He will order you to fall down on your knees and offer me reverence, and while you are prostrate in this slavish attitude, he plans to cut your head off with your own sword. There is only one way for you to escape." The corpse told the king what he should do, and then the ghost left the body. Our king finally walks back to the magician, or maybe we should use more loaded words now and call him an evil sorcerer. When the king arrives, the sorcerer doesn't appear at all surprised that it's taken him such a long time. He took the corpse and laid it in the magic circle in the funerary grounds that he had prepared, visible only by the ghastly light of candles made of corpse fat. The sorcerer spoke incantations and spells over the corpse. The ghost came back into the body. "Look," said the sorcerer, "at what you and I have wrought. We have created a new life, a new form, and this should be our God. You should get down on your knees and worship our creation." "I see," said the king. "You would have me kneel before this new God. Well, I would like to do as you have ordered, but as king, I am unused to such postures. Perhaps you could demonstrate to me this form of prostration that you would like me to adopt." "All right," said the sorcerer, and he got down on his knees and pressed his forehead to the ground. The king took out his sword and cut off the evil sorcerer's head and then cut out his heart. He offered them to the ghost in the corpse. The whole funerary ground broke out with such sounds of jubilation. The king has saved all of these dead ones from a form of spiritual slavery. A great evil has been averted. "Now," the corpse said to the king, "how would you like to be compensated for your long night of toil?" "All that I ask," the king replied, "is that my story and the 24 tales that you have told be preserved and told over and over again as a means of liberation for others." The ghost agreed to this, and then the great god Shiva, the masculine lord of creation and destruction and the lord of the universe, appeared. He granted the king sovereignty over the world and enlightened consciousness. Dawn was breaking as the king left the gruesome funerary grounds and returned to his palace transformed. What is your moment in this story? What intrigues you about it? As I mentioned earlier, I've worked with this story a few times and have had different answers to that question and focused on different dimensions of the story as a result. For example, the way the king accepts this gift of fruit day after day after day after day without investigating it, without even appreciating it. He never bites into any of the fruit. He never eats any of it. The king receives this humble but presumably enjoyable gift day after day and simply hands it to his treasurer, who then piles it up in a storeroom someplace. Which is ridiculous when you think about it, because how long is a piece of fruit going to be good? How long before it rots and is wasted? The king has so much. He has too much, I think. And his material wealth translates into a disregard for the value of everyday things that sustain life, and a mistaken sense of security and invincibility. The king thinks he knows what's going on. He thinks he's right and good. He thinks that he's untouchable. This is my interpretation. And this theme of seeing past the surface, of recognizing true value and the king's error, is emphasized by the presence of a literal jewel in each piece of fruit, a symbol of great and hidden value. Another piece of this story that I've thought about before is the similarity in the king's treatment of the fruit gift and of the priest/evil magician. He takes both of them at face value and doesn't try to get beyond his first superficial impression. Eventually, the king does have some curiosity about the evil magician, but his capacity for honest inquiry is so limited that he takes everything this other man says at face value, doesn't really ask questions about the jewel, and he even goes so far as to imagine himself a hero under the influence of the compliments that are paid him. The king's lack of willingness to look further, to question and perhaps pose questions that push up against the edges of his comfortable vision of himself, and his assumed wisdom almost cost him his life. Today, I find myself thinking about this corpse that needs to be cut down from the tree and presumably laid properly to rest, and how the king must walk back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Handling the corpse isn't a straightforward task. What's it going to take? What's going to be required for both the corpse and the king to end this tedious process? What does the corpse signify? This dead thing poses riddling questions to the king, and he fails these tests because he can't see the complications and contradictions in the situations they describe. Over and over again, he strives for black and white clarity. He looks for simple logic. This is true, so this must be false, and so this must be the right answer. He makes this mistake in thinking over and over again, and the corpse is suddenly hanging from the tree once again, and the king has to go and cut it down and put it over his shoulder and trudge back across the cemetery grounds. But he does get there. He finally understands that life is full of ambiguity and paradox, of contradictions that can be resolved in any number of ways depending on your point of view. The king finally understands that what appears obvious is not, and that there's more to know beneath the surface of a person, situation, or piece of fruit. Given that this is my moment, I wonder whether or not, or rather how, I am like the king. What are my habitual errors in thinking? The assumptions and old patterns that prevent me from understanding and seeing the larger reality? How am I in a long, confusing engagement with the dead thing that refuses to be put to rest until I see with fresh eyes? In the words of poet Jack Gilbert, we must unlearn the constellations to see the stars. Am I seeing the stars? Let's stop here. The story is so rich, and I trust that you found something interesting to consider. I have a poem for you, but first, a big welcome to new email subscribers: Barb, Jen, Joseph, Sherry, Mary, Allison, John, Deb, Russell, Melvin, Linda, Eamon, Mikey, Mary, Lane, and Bob. Welcome to Myth Matters. If you're new to Myth Matters, I invite you to head over to the Mythic Mojo website. You'll find a transcript of this episode, information about Mythic mentorship and creativity coaching that I offer, and you can also join the email list if you would like to receive links to new Myth Matters episodes in your inbox. The International Society for Mythology is holding their annual Mythologium next month. This conference will take place online from March 13th to 15th. The theme is Mythic Imagination. Dr. Emily Hauser, author of Mythica and Penelope's Bones, is the keynote speaker. I've dropped the info and registration link in the transcript of this episode, if this sounds interesting to you. Join other scholars, artists, and mythology enthusiasts from around the world to explore how mythic imagination illuminates paths of renewal in our contemporary world and guides us during times of personal and collective challenges. A shout out to my Patreon patrons and supporters on Bandcamp, whose financial support and companionship enable me to keep creating Myth Matters for you. Thanks to Kevin and an anonymous friend for their generous donations this month. If you're finding something of value here, then I hope you'll support this work in some way by making a contribution or posting a positive review or email me and let me know that you're listening. Thank you. We are in the part of our collective story that is between recognized stories, my friend, between paradigms. Let's not rush to conclusions. Let's wait, listen, feel, reflect together. See what rises up and who or what comes forward to help. Let's cultivate a state of active receptivity to new ideas, information, questions, experiments, and dreams. I have a poem for you before we close, one that helps me feel into this space and also carries my wish for some winter here in Colorado. This is First Snow by Mary Oliver from her collection New and Collected Poems. First Snow. The snow began here this morning and all day continued, its white rhetoric everywhere calling us back to why, how, whence such beauty and what the meaning. Such an oracular fever, flowing past windows, an energy it seemed would never ebb, never settle, less than lovely, and only now, deep into night, it has finally ended. The silence is immense, and the heavens still hold a million candles, nowhere at the familiar things. Stars, the moon, the darkness we expect and nightly turn from. Trees glitter like castles of ribbons. The broad fields smolder with light. A passing creek bed lies heaped with shining hills. And though the questions that have assailed us all day remain, not a single answer has been found. Walking out now into the silence and the light under the trees and through the fields feels like one. If we have a better understanding of our need for myth and all that our old stories offer, we can live more satisfying lives. We can inhabit a better story and create a more beautiful, just, and sustainable world. And that's it for me, Catherine Savela, and Myth Matters. Take good care of yourself, and until next time, keep the mystery in your life alive.